You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by Amac, the Association of Mature American Citizens.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber, and this is your Amac podcast, Better for America. Today, we have with us a leader in the Republican Party, a can-do, get-it-done leader, and the congressman from Texas's 4th District, Congressman Pat Fallon. Now, he has proven that straight talk, focus, and persistence really do pay off. From humble rural roots, he played football for Notre Dame, a game that Ronald Reagan played elsewhere, but a school he knew well, playing the movie role of George Gipp, also known as the Gipper. Our guest made it to the 1988 National Championship before turning to the Air Force and then politics. He has been the chief executive of a patriotic Texas company and a proven winner at grassroots and national political leadership. Today, as a member of Congress, he is all about leading. He is a vigorous defender of our First Amendment rights, supported a Texas bill banning abortion after 20 weeks, is an advocate for fiscal responsibility, election integrity, and family values. And I would also be remiss if I did not mention that he's a true superstar in another way. And I find this truly fascinating. In 2016, Congressman Pat Fallon completed 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. Now, this is one of the few ever to attempt and complete the feat, and he was the oldest to do so at 48 years old. So it is really just an honor to have you with us today, Congressman. Welcome to the show.
Rebecca, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. So, Congressman, we've had so much to cover, and I know you are really in the game, so to speak, but I want to start with a big picture question. As you look at Congress today, having followed and been in politics for a very long time, do you see an institution living up to its constitutional promise with accountability to the American people and preserving limited government, or are you seeing something else? Because our 2.5 million members, they see or, really are feeling that Congress is intensely partisan and really dysfunctional under current leadership. What are you seeing?
Well, Rebecca, that's a great question. And I knew when I was coming into Congress that it was going to be very different than my experiences in the state legislature. I had served at the local level as a city councilman for 3 years, and then 8 years in the Texas House and Senate. And coming here, it wasn't partisan, it was hyper partisan, and it still is. And it's very unfortunate because, in fact, I said that when I spoke on the House floor a few months back. I said, we're here not to do the Republican thing or the Democratic thing, but the American thing, to do what's best for this country. And unfortunately, you don't see that because I guess the best way to answer this is to tell you the differences. So when you're in the Texas House and Senate, almost 99% of bills that were passed, believe it or not, over the last decade, had at least some bipartisan support. In Texas, there were some partisan fights, and there always are going to be. But that's remarkable, and that the press never reports that because that shows that actually Texas and Republican stewardship is very effective. Texas, has an economic miracle. It performed incredibly well and better than the average of the other 49 states combined. But here in DC, everything seems to be partisan, and unfortunately, most things are not. I mean, let's talk about transportation. That shouldn't be a partisan issue in any regard. It may be regional, but it shouldn't be partisan. And yet Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have made it a point to pretty much make everything partisan, and it's very sad.
Yeah, it really is. It seems that they're really, instead of accountability, they're putting their personal agenda first. They've got this socialist ideology, runaway spending that is creating inflation. And Americans work so hard, they save their money, and somehow it seems that Congress doesn't really get it. Are AMAC members really right to be critical in this area of spending? Because, boy, we hope we see some changes in 2022. What do you think the 2022 midterm elections might bring?
Well, let's take the first part as far as inflation goes. Yeah, when you inject just this year alone, even though most of the coronavirus allocations from last year, most of those monies, most of that money that was authorized hadn't been spent yet, we still passed a $1.9 trillion. That's $1,900 billion in quote unquote coronavirus relief in a package. But unfortunately, 91% of that 1.9 million had nothing to do with COVID relief. And then we see, of course, when we turn around and the $1.2 trillion for infrastructure. Now, Joe Biden started out at 2.25 trillion, and he said he had to have it or the sky would fall. And yet he just really picked that out of the sky because he went to 1.2 trillion when he didn't have the votes for the 2.25. And then we just saw what Joe Biden calls the Build Back Better, what I call the Bernie Biden Bankruptcy Boondoggle. I call it 4Bs, the 1.75 trillion. And that's also deceptive. Very quickly, that 1.75 trillion, if you actually look at the true cost, it creates 150 new federal programs. It uses the word tax, penalty, fee, and revenue 600 times in a 2,500 page bill. But our debt is projected in 29 years to go in today's dollars from 29 trillion to 118 trillion. However, with the passage of the quadruple B, if the Senate were to pass it in its current form, that debt would actually be $140 trillion. So it really has a cost of 22 trillion. I just wanted to point that out to your viewers because I know they're very smart and they want to know the truth, transparency. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah.
And to the second part of your question as to how 2022 looks, well, isn't it interesting that Nancy Pelosi took over the House of Representatives after the 2006 election, and it took 4 years. The American taxpayers and the American voters revolted, and I believe there was a net gain of Republicans to the tune of around 63 seats. 63 seats, an historic win. That wasn't a red wave, that was a red tsunami. And now what do we have? After the 2018 election, Nancy Pelosi was reinstalled as Speaker. 4 years later, it'll be the 2022 election. And we're poised right now. We only need to win a net 5 seats for the Republicans to take the majority. It looks like it could be anywhere from on the low end 25 to the high end 50.
Wow. Well, that's really important that you share that information because people really need to see on the spending side what that really means. When Joe Biden says that it's going to cost zero, people are smarter than that, and they understand that there are costs there. And we appreciate that you are so resolved not to back away and back up, and that you're speaking out, and we appreciate that. I just want to ask you a little bit. It would shift just a moment here to talk about some of our other constitutional rights, and in particular, freedom of speech, freedom of worship. You have been an outspoken advocate for the idea that we should advocate and celebrate free speech, even when it offends, and not cancel speech. And you have been at a time, I think, really when our moral fiber and religious rights so seem under fire, an advocate for those of faith and those who oppose open-ended abortion. Could you take a moment and speak to us about your views on free speech, free exercise of religion? And then I want to shift to the abortion issue because we see what's unfolding. We understand that the Supreme Court is hearing opening statements on this issue, Mississippi Dobbs case. So I do want to talk a little bit about that and why these things really matter. Why should all of this matter to all of us, really?
Sure. Let's be honest, Rebecca. I mean, the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to seek redress, freedom of religion. It's not only in the foundation of the Constitution and really our founding, but it's interwoven into the fabric of our society and what it means to be an American. I grew up, as did everyone that has been blessed to live in this country, that you knew you could say what you wanted without fear of government coming to your home and robbing you perhaps of your own liberty, or smashing your car or burning down your house, which unfortunately you don't have to go back in time to see that. Right. Too many countries on the planet still practice it. And that's the thing. So we have to be thankful of not only where we live, but when we live. And we live at the right time, but we also live in the right place, because lots of people don't live in the right place. They live in and unfortunately the wrong time as well. So we can't have a country as we know it unless we respect the First Amendment above all else. And the Second Amendment helps us enforce the first, because that's one of the things, the misconceptions that many liberals have with the Second Amendment, is they think that, well, it was for a militia and to go hunting. And no, firearms is also to protect the American citizenry against an overreaching government. Yeah, so that's very clear. And we've seen it, unfortunately. We never would have dreamt 2 or 3 years ago. The conventional wisdom would have said there's no possible way state governments would deny people the right to go to church. And yet that's exactly what we saw. And COVID was used as a pretext. And I find it very hypocritical that, if you can recall, let's be fair about this, that in 2020, when you mix politics and medicine, you're going to get bad politics and you're going to get bad medicine. And there's 2 instances of that I'd really like to point out, because I think it's important. We saw that when there were some folks that got together and protested the lockdowns, or what they saw as an overreaching state or local government, the mandates that had to do with COVID, we saw some protests, some organized protests. And the CDC and the elites said, oh my goodness, I can't believe they're doing this. This is dangerous. These are acting as super spreaders. Also, they said the same thing about Trump rallies. And yet, when the left supported protests for BLM and Antifa, literally there were statements put out by physicians and organizations and groups that said, medical groups, that this is okay, that COVID won't spread. How is that possible? So COVID is only going to spread if you have a protest they disagree with. And then the second quick instance is Joe Biden stopped international travel. He just has recently opened it up, but for 10 months, he said, COVID is so dangerous, we can't have anybody from Europe, Canada, really anywhere in the world come to this country, even if they're vaccinated, even if they test negative upon entry, even they have pocketfuls of money ready to spend in America. Can't have it.
Yeah.
COVID is just too much of a threat. They closed the northern border. There are no Canadians that were coming through. And at the same time, 1.6 million people from countries that don't have any vaccination rates to speak of were coming through the southern border. And then once upon arrival, they were then spread and fanned out across the country. And that was underwritten by the American taxpayer. That's just completely hypocritical.
It really is. Speak to me a little bit about what you see unfolding in the Supreme Court with this Mississippi Dobbs case.
That's, it's playing out just down the street here. And there were many protests yesterday. It could be historic. And I've always contended that Roe v. Wade was, it was erroneous and it was a horrible decision, because the abortion issue, to me, is very clear that that's a state issue. The federal government has obviously the Constitution never mentioned abortion or a right to it. And that's a state issue. We have 50 laboratories of democracy for a reason. What, again, the left doesn't share is, even before Roe v. Wade, there were many states that took it upon themselves to ban abortion. And then there were other states that allowed it. And that's the way it should be. If in Texas, we don't want to have abortions or we want to restrict it, we have every right to. The federal government has no business whatsoever to tell us. There is a 10th Amendment for a reason, to tell us what we do in Texas. And if Vermont wants to go their way, they can go there. And you know what? People can vote with their feet, and they can live in Vermont, they can live in Texas. It's up to them.
That's a really good point, and that's what we need to remind folks listening. Very well said. Hearing someone really speak up for the Constitution and for such fundamental truths and understandings is really heartening. I do want to shift to a related issue, or one that relates to limiting the power of the federal government, really stopping federal overreach as well as overspending. So let me come at this idea, the importance of limited government, in 2 ways. First, on the non-spending side, we seem to be seeing a shift toward socialist tactics, such as branding parents as domestic terrorists, right? We all heard that, and FBI intimidations of those who speak up for their children at school boards. And then on the spending side, we see this endless push to spend money that no one has. The nation is definitely at risk with $30 trillion in debt. And our currency, it's fast losing value. Inflation seems to be on a rip, and this Congress, they're just not limiting spending, they're increasing it. So how do we get back to limited government, both a limited executive and a limited Congress, addressing both the unjust federal coercion and federal overspending? How do we get back to that limited government?
Oh, Rebecca, to use a vernacular phrase, throw the bums out. Elections have consequences. And
Yeah.
what we need to see believe it or not, I mean, people will begin voting in the midterm elections in 11 months. I've been here in Congress for 12 months. It's gone
Yeah.
rather quickly. So we have to endure 11 more months, unfortunately. But people need to get out there and exercise their right. What we saw in Virginia with Governor-elect Youngkin, what we saw in New Jersey with the Republicans almost taking the governor's mansion there, and really across the country, Columbia, South Carolina, for the first time in 40 years, elected a Republican mayor. We had a special election in Texas for a state house seat that the Republicans had lost by 14 points, and we just won it by 2. So what we have seen is about a 15% shift. And there's not, I mean, that's what, if that were to hold in the election were held today, I think the Democrats may lose 80 seats. It would be an historic one. It would make 2010 not look all that bad from their perspective.
That's
So
right.
to get back to limited government, we need to elect conservatives. It just so happens that Republicans are the party where most conservatives find a home, but it's more important to elect conservatives than it is to elect Republicans. And, and people that have a track record. That's one of the reasons why I'm in Congress now is I was able to pitch to the voters with 22 candidates in a primary. I said, you don't have to believe a word I say. You can just look at what I've done. I have a record. And if you like what I've seen, you like what I've been doing for the last 10 years, you might want to send me to Washington because I'm going to continue to do the same thing.
Well, that's really great. I want to move to an issue that really affects us all. Just a few weeks ago, Amac was actually down at the southern border in Del Rio, Texas, in Kinney County. And this has become such a big concern for Amac members and really for all Americans, but especially for those in Texas. I had this wonderful opportunity to meet with lifetime Amac members on their ranch. They've got thousands of acres of property that really butts up almost right down to the river there and the stream where many of these drug cartels are passing through their private property. We met with Border Patrol, and we just had a wonderful opportunity to engage with the men and the women that are really making a difference and doing their very best to try to protect Americans and also those people who are coming over illegally. How do you see the border crisis? How serious is it? And how do we maintain hope that we can get back to the sanctity of our border and away from open borders, which we know triggers illegal alien caravans and drugs and human trafficking? The reason why we do this podcast is not to depress people or to really talk about negativity, but to really make sure that people across all 50 states understand what we're facing, because the only change that will happen is at the ballot box, as you just said. Mm-hmm. So speak to me on the border crisis. What are you seeing? How bad are things, and where do you think we're headed over the next 12 months?
Rebecca, it's not a border crisis, it's a border catastrophe. And I would say that if there was a Republican in the White House and he or she implemented the same policies that Joe Biden has made, and let's make no mistake about it, every state in this country a border state. So what has happened and why is it different? First and foremost, President Trump had policies that worked. The number one policy that worked was the wait in Mexico policy. If you want to seek asylum into this country, you'll wait in Mexico while we adjudicate your claim. We're going to build a border wall. We're going to finish that border wall. And because that would reduce the flood to a trickle. It's one tool in the toolbox to help secure the border. It's not the only one, and it won't secure the border in and of itself. A wall won't. And he was deporting people, particularly and focusing on bad actors, predators, people that harm, violent criminals, gang members. And ironically, those people are harming who the most? Much disproportionately, they're harming people of color. So for the left to interject, which they seem to always do on almost every issue, to say this is a racial issue, and then anybody that wants to secure the border, and they'll use awful pejoratives, it say it's racist, is ridiculous. In fact, you can flip it on its head and say, you're actually being racist. Because let me point out a couple of facts that you may not have heard. 3.8 million people, 3.8 million people are waiting to come to this country legally from across the world. 1 million of those are Mexican nationals waiting in Mexico, in their home country. These are exactly the kind of people we want to come to this country. They're respecting the laws and the rules of the country that they want to become a part of. Of those 3.8 million, 95% of them are people of color. And that's who conservatives are rooting for. And when we have needs, we need to do what's in the best interest of this nation state and no other. Put America first. Joe Biden has put America last. He is allowing other nation states to export their poverty through mass unlawful migration. Now, we need to also, if we're going to talk about the border, we must talk about the drug cartels. There are 5 major drug cartels that operate along the Texas border with Mexico. And they're vicious, they're ruthless, and they're murderers. They're also very wealthy, very effective. Journalists in Mexico don't talk about the cartels because the cartels will kill them if they do. Nobody north of the border, these journalists that want to respect their trade, they don't talk about their brothers and sisters in journalism in Mexico, because if the American people knew what was really going on, they would demand that the border is secure. Just this year alone, 11,362 pounds of fentanyl has been seized. That's enough fentanyl to kill every single American 8 times over. There were 15,600 pounds of methamphetamine seized just last month in October. That's the data, the last month that we have data for. The drug cartels have a GDP estimated at, on the low end, $15 billion, on the high end, $40 billion. That's the GDP of small nation states. In fact, Estonia, one of our NATO allies, has a GDP of 32 billion. Latvia is 33 billion, and Lithuania is 56 billion. And the drug cartels are on par with those countries. And we have a Democratic Party that only have 2 major parties in this country, and one of them thinks that the border is just fine as it is, and we don't need to do anything additional. That is madness. It's dangerous. And if Joe Biden wants to keep Americans safe, secure the border.
It is madness. It is dangerous. And it really undermines citizenship, our public safety, our elections. We've got to tackle this issue. And we really can't let the Biden-Harris experiment, which is exactly what they're doing. They're experimenting with wide open borders, and it's impacting Americans in all 50 states in a very bad way. I agree with you on the Biden catastrophe, because and for folks who can see this here, we put out our magazine and called it the Biden Catastrophe. There was no end in sight. We still don't see an end in sight. Somebody said, let's go with Biden crisis. And I said just what you said, Congressman. It's a catastrophe. People, there are so many good people in Texas that are doing such good work, and my heart breaks, because when I see, I pray for their morale, that they can continue to do the good work that they're doing with the limited resources that they have. Well, thank you so much, because really your sharing with us is a great voice, and we need to hear this. We need to understand that something more needs to be done. Yeah, thank you. But we are fighting.
Can I just, Rebecca,
Absolutely.
Can I hop in here too and just share also that in the South, in South Texas, what we call the Valley, it's overwhelmingly Hispanic population, Americans of Hispanic descent, 85%, 90%. They are coming to the Republican Party in droves. In fact, if you look at Zapata County, which is a border county with Mexico, President Trump won that county in the 2020 election, having previously lost it to Hillary Clinton by nearly 30%. And then in Starr County, a county of 800,000 people, President Trump almost won it. And McAllen, Texas, elected a Republican as their mayor. And Ryan Guillen, who is a state representative that I served with, who's been a 20-year Democrat, just switched parties to the Republicans, and President Trump endorsed him because Ryan couldn't sit back and let what happened. He, in good conscience, couldn't be called a Democrat anymore. And he said, President Trump's border policies worked. We saw it firsthand, and nobody saw this coming, that Hispanics along the border we're probably going to pick up at least 1 congressional seat on the border in the next cycle, and possibly 2. Tony Gonzalez won in 2020 everyone thought the conventional wisdom was Tony couldn't win, the Republican candidate. Well, not only did he win, he won by 4 percentage points. He blew it out of the water.
Wow. And that really gets people thinking. But, it's no wonder when you look around at what's happening, and you just see everything from the defund police movement to labeling parents as terrorists, to the disastrous pull out of Afghanistan, to emboldening other nations, ruining our entire energy independence, just not putting the American people first, inflation like we haven't seen in decades, and that impacts the middle class, middle America. So when Joe Biden promised to be a moderate Democrat, and he promised to, take care of the middle class, he's doing the exact opposite. We're all feeling it, and it's no wonder. It's no wonder. I do want to ask you a professional, but kind of an individual question, because as a conservative today, it's hard sometimes. We see cancel culture. We're not able to get our voice out there. And there's so much divide in this nation. It is scary, I think, political times. What motivates you, Congressman, to keep fighting? Where do you get your inner motivation from, especially when things are really tough?
I'm going to answer the question beyond honest and just be very candid with you, Rebecca, and forthcoming. And I don't care if it sounds hokey or not. I mean, I absolutely adore this country. I have a love affair with Lady Liberty, and I have since I was a child, because we were taught the truth about this country. It's not perfect. This country never was, but it's still a great country. And I often talk to audiences, and I'll ask them, how many people here were raised, show of hands, please, how many people were raised here by perfect parents? And unless their mom sit next to them, nobody raises their hand. But I say, right. How many people were raised by great parents? And many people raised their hands. In fact, the majority of the audience. And I'll say, so let's not let the left trick our young people by pointing out and focusing, hyper focusing, and they're doing it rather in the open now with the 1619 project garbage. Yes. To sit there and say the United States was founded in 1619 when we weren't even declared, we didn't even declare ourselves a nation until 1776, and say it was founded on slavery is ridiculous. Now, obviously, slavery was the darkest moment in our past, to treat human beings as if they were property. And it hurts my heart to think that our country was once that, that short-sighted. But it's not that way anymore, and we corrected it. And hundreds of thousands of men gave their lives to correct that original sin, if you will. And so when I look at, on balance, what a great nation this is and how much good it does, not only for our own country, but across the world, I want to do everything I can to preserve it, because I really do think about what your epitaph, what is your epitaph going to say on your tombstone? And I want mine to say, he loved his country, he loved his family, and he fought for both. And that's what we need to do. And, I've played football for legendary Hall of Fame coach Lou Holtz. And Coach Holtz would say, if you'd say, Pat, there used to be, the two different parties had two different paths, but to really reach the same goal. Today, they have not only two different paths, they have two different goals entirely. And you see that with the legislation that's come out. And I can't believe that the Democratic Party has gone this far left. I've met so many people that said, I left the Democratic Party because it left me long before I realized how bad they'd become. And that's unfortunate, but we have to have fiscal responsibility. We have to eventually have a balanced budget amendment. And we have to change the culture in Washington. So yes, we can have our partisan fights, but we should be looking at ways in which we can work together for the betterment of our country.
Yeah. Well, it's great that you keep fighting, even when the chips are down and the pressure is on and things look tough. And a great reminder for those listening to have with them the same spirit. And I do think that those listening would be really interested to hear from you on the subject of how you decided, or did you decide in a time before Congress to attempt running 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents? The thought of it is exhausting, but my goodness, what an amazing feat. What did that require of you? What did you lean on for strength in that attempt at such a remarkable feat? And what got you through that ordeal? Tell us about what caused you to make that decision.
Rebecca, one of the most unique things that I've ever done, but also one of the best things. It was a little boy named Johnny Wade who was battling meloblastoma, which is a very deadly form of brain cancer, very rare for a child to get. And he had twin brother Jackie, who was healthy physically, but not emotionally. And we didn't know the family, but I had a dear friend that did know them. And I had read a Facebook post and I was so moved by it. I wanted to do something. I just didn't know what. And I had seen a article on ESPN, a news article about how they have this thing called the World Marathon Challenge. And at the time, I was 40 pounds heavier than I am now. And I thought, my goodness, if somebody like me were to do something like that, I could get a lot of attention and I could raise money for pediatric cancer research and also give Johnny Wade a distraction, him and his brother, because little boys like the notion of travel across the world. And so what you do is you start running marathons in Antarctica. That's the first one you do in the interior of Antarctica, 600 miles from the South Pole. And then you do one in South America, Punta Arenas, Chile, Miami, Madrid, Morocco, Dubai, and then you finish in Sydney, Australia. So I had a problem. I'm not a runner at the time, and I only had 85 days to train. But what I learned is, if you're very disciplined in your training, and you have the support of your family and friends, and you have a deep belief in things greater than yourself. And in this case, it was completely a God thing. And I didn't start out that way. I started out that way, admittedly, to raise as much money as I could for pediatric cancer research, and probably a bit of a machismo thing to say, I can do this, I can get my body back, I can become fit again. But what the outcome, the outtake was, love thy neighbor. Because I saw the best of humanity for 4 months. It was magnificent. It was really wonderful for that 3.5 month period or so. And I ended up losing 40 pounds in 3 months. I never got hurt. I started out, my buddy said to me once, Rebecca, he said, Pat, when you did that marathon thing, how many miles did you start when you were running? And I said, miles? I was running mailboxes. I'd go up to my 7th mailbox in my neighborhood. I'd stop. I was exhausted. And that's how it started. But your body will respond. And that's why, I don't care how old someone is. If they're 60, 70, 80, or 90, you can become more fit than you are today if you choose to. And you have to have some good fortune here and there, and you have to stay healthy and have to stretch. So I was stretching vigorously before I'd go run. I was foam rolling before I'd go run. When I was in my 20s, I didn't have to do that. In my 40s, I had to. And it ended up just completing it successfully, 183.4 miles in a week. We only slept 18 hours the entire time we were running, which is remarkable. I saw it on my Fitbit later. We didn't eat all that much because of the travel. We tried to get in as many calories as we could. And lo and behold, the last marathon in Sydney, Australia was my fastest. And I ran it in under 4 hours at 3 hours and 53 minutes, almost won the race against younger and far more experienced competitors. It was an absolute miracle. It was a God thing. And in 5 years, we've been a small part of raising a few $1 million for pediatric cancer research.
What an incredible feat. That is just marvelous and so uplifting. You had no idea that you were a runner. You had no idea, right? I mean, you just did it. I don't think my knees or my hips would hold out. That's awesome. I just love hearing it, but you never know. I mean, I do think that when you put your mind to something, and I am a big believer in this, a huge believer, that if you put your mind to something and you want something enough, that it's possible to achieve. It certainly is. So this is very uplifting and reinforcing. Thank you so much for your time today.
Rebecca, thank you for having me. I'd like to come on anytime, and I'd like to wish all of your members a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And God bless you.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, we feel the same for you and your family. And I want to thank you for your defense of our constitutional rights, for your voice, for your conviction in this fight for our nation's future. And, our AMAC members are patriots. So we truly do appreciate those who are fighting for the values that we hold dear. And we appreciate the service that you're giving, the sacrifice that you're making, and really your determination to prevail every day in Congress. So thank you for your time. And we hope to see you again soon. And I want to thank everybody listening out there, especially our AMAC members, for tuning in today, because AMAC members really are the ones who give us our voice and our strength in Washington. When we go to Washington and we say we've got 2.5 million patriotic Americans that are standing behind us on these issues, people listen. We need more members to get more things done. We need a bigger muscle in Washington, because we know the other organization has a lot of clout, and we need to push back against some of what's happening. some of the very bad policies that we see are not good for America. So if you haven't renewed your AMAC membership, please do so. And if you haven't downloaded the AMAC News app, you can watch and listen to this podcast. You can track breaking news on the AMAC News app. It's fantastic. I personally love it. It's better than all the others, in my opinion. It's easy to navigate, and the news is just so good. So please be sure to download the news app, like, share, hit the subscribe button on this video, and share wherever you are on social media. Until next time, everyone, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here. God bless you, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Better for America podcast. To learn more about AMAC and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.